want to shoot and going with them. I mean, there was no right if you guys said, this is what you want to do with your body, but it's what you want to do. Well, it's like everything. It's the ideal situation doesn't actually exist. Your wife was supposed to wake up in the morning. Did she tell you that?
You better wake her up.
Yeah.
Well, I did. I had to leave.
Like to splash water on the things. She's got not more information I'm supposed to come. So we're gonna start a trip later.
Traffic was.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
You ought to wait. Like you're coming from Southern Valley.
I mean, but I can't wait until the 117.
Yeah, I heard that on Thursday, somebody said there's a road exit, and they just kept saying the commissioners approved, and I wasn't sure. They're talking planning commissioners, so they didn't give a disclaimer on the who, so. They got a lot of messages with it.
And so, of course, I fired once, a second, and he grabbed it. So. And all that much stuff now. I mean, it's already. Comfort.
Yeah.
Like the man at like 8 o'clock. I just do this.
First day of school today, that makes it.
Well,
that
I'm
makes
sure
it-
that was, I didn't realize, as I was driving in, I realized all purpose for that. So,
I'll move my stuff anyway. Have to bring. Trisha needs jalapenos. We always forget to trade those out.
What?
Jalapenos we can, and she doesn't have the jalapenos for her salsa. You sit up here, so you have to not be, Good morning.
Kristen, how are you, man?
Are you on today?
I'm on today.
Somebody check in.
All right,
There's breakfast too, once Diane
Coming.
gets here.
breakfast is on its way.
All right, technology, are we recording? Like, take your mute off if that's the answer to the question. Jason,
Urgency.
Hi,
All
Agent, you are live.
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, good morning for the two of you in the audience and those online. There should be more people coming. I know breakfast is on its way. But today our commissioner chat is with Justice Services. There's a lot more to Justice Services than just housing youth. And so we wanted an opportunity to understand what they do in our community so that we can better understand that function. So with that, we will give it back to the director.
Good morning. Ron Stoltz is my name. I'm the Director of Justice Services. And like Commissioner Williams said, there's a lot more to just housing kids in our juvenile detention center. We actually have 3 departments under the umbrella of Justice Services. One is obviously the juvenile detention facility, which is a 27-bed facility that we built back in 2011 and opened the doors, well, or closed the doors, I guess, however you want to put that, in May of 2012. And then we also have juvenile probation. So all those kids that are in our facility, when they're released back to the community to their parents, then the probation officers monitor them to make sure they're complying with their court orders, such as going to school, not using drugs and alcohol. There's about 30 conditions of probation that they have to follow. And so the juvenile POs are working to make sure that they're following those. And then we also do adult misdemeanor probation. So a lot of folks don't realize that we do also do adult probation. So there's 2 in the state of Idaho. There's 2 different adult probation departments. There's the felony probation and parole, which is a state department called the Idaho Department of Corrections. And so they deal with all this, I hate to say real serious offenders, because we end up with a lot of those folks on misdemeanor probation as a result of either plea bargains or a myriad of different reasons, but usually it's a plea bargain that dumps them out of district court back down into magistrate court, which magistrate court handles all misdemeanors in family court and lower level civil. Morning. And so, so the types of offenses that we primarily see with adult misdemeanor probation are one, domestic battery. Most people, domestic battery can either be a felony or misdemeanor, depending on the severity of it, or if there's children involved in it or present when it occurs. And we see a big portion of those cases dropped out of felony court down into juvenile, or not juvenile court, but misdemeanor court, primarily because the victims are also have to become the witness. So now they're testifying against their boyfriend, husband, wife, whoever the perpetrator is, and oftentimes they're either not cooperative or don't really want to see their spouse or significant other getting in a lot of trouble. So a lot of times plea bargains are offered in those kind of cases. And then the other cases that we see a ton of in adult misdemeanor on our caseloads there are DUIs. So we get a ton of DUIs, we get a ton of domestic violence cases. In fact, our numbers for the adult misdemeanor caseload, and we have 3 adult probation officers, and they average about 100 cases per caseload. And we have one PO that's specifically does all of the domestic violence cases, so that she's very busy keeping track of that. And the court has a domestic violence court, so she's doing lots of review reports, because they usually come in once a month for a review with the judge and the PO and everyone. And so, and then we also have one PO that's designated as DUI cases, and he also sits on the drug court group that's over, that Judge Breeze runs over the courthouse. Judge Buchanan it was the previous person who basically started it in Bonner County, and then when she retired, Judge Breeze took it over. So that's kind of the adult misdemeanor. Kind of back to the juvenile caseload, we keep lower. And the reason we do that is because you need to work more intensively with the juveniles, because you also have their parents that you're dealing with. You're dealing with the juvenile. They go to school, so we're in the schools a lot. We're working closely with the schools because, as we all know, our education is basically the foundation for the rest of our future. And so if you start out with a crappy foundation, what usually happens to that structure? It doesn't hold up very well, and that's kind of what happens to our kids if they don't get a good base and don't get that good education to start with. Then their futures are not quite as bright as they probably should be or could be. So we work real closely with the schools. And the cases that we see on juvenile probation, they vary considerably. Anything that's criminal can fall under our auspices. It doesn't have to be a felony or a misdemeanor. They all fall under juvenile probation as long as they're under the age of 18. There are some special cases that automatically waive up into adult court. If they're over the age of 14, then those cases are things like murder, rape, first-degree arson. So the more heinous crimes automatically waive to adult court. Fortunately, we don't see a lot of those here, but they do happen, and we have had those cases. We have not had I hate to even say it out loud, we've not had a juvenile murder since I've been here, and I've been here for 30 years. So hopefully we don't see that. We did have a couple kids in right when we opened the new facility that were in for attempted murder, and luckily they were hitchhiking, and an elderly lady picked them up, and they decided they wanted to steal her car, and luckily she was a very, very tough older lady, and she survived the beating that she took. Otherwise we would have had a murder back in, it would have been in 2011. So I did just bring some statistics. I don't know how much you want me to go into the weeds on some of this stuff, or do you want me to keep it more generic and answer questions? Or
I want to make sure everybody gets to answer questions, but I think when I learn about what you guys do, it's way more than you think of just youth detention center. And that's not all that you're doing over there. So I think it's beneficial to talk about that, especially when we come around budget time. We need, as people, to remember, hey, are we paying attention to that as well?
Right,
So
right.
I think the more information, the better. And they're good at saying, I have a question, and then we'll just
Okay.
ask questions, but I think it's beneficial.
Yeah, so no, I didn't talk too much about the detention center other than we opened it in 2012. Prior to that, we had housed kids there where the driver's license building is. And the kids called it grandma's house, and not so much because it was not as secure as like the facility we have now, but we actually had a kid that was in there whose grandma actually owned that house previous to the county buying it and putting probation and juvenile detention in there. So that's actually why it was called grandma's house, not because it was, the kids were treated like they were at grandma's house. But anyway,
That's a fun.
that's a
That's
kind of,
an
yeah,
extra
that's kind of a
question,
fun fact.
Extra
Yeah,
credit. question.
exactly. Yeah, there will be a quiz at the end, so I hope you're all paying. No, there won't be a quiz. But anyway, our facility, we built it. It's a 27-bed facility. We're really staffed for 16, and that we're usually under 16. This morning, we have 11 kids in there. The tricky part about the 11 that we have in there, we have 4 on observation status because they were either suicidal or had some suicidal ideation over the weekend. So and we only have 2 observation cells. So both observation cells are full. And then we have 2 kids that are on mattresses in the pod so that we can keep close watch on them, because we have to, when they're like that, then we have to keep a 5-minute watch on them. We have to notate that they've been checked every 5 minutes. And so they're not safe to be inside their cell because we can't see them visibly within those 5 minutes. So they just have to be visible at all times until our clinician comes in, who will be in tomorrow, and he'll evaluate them to decide whether they're safe to go back into their cell or if they need to continue on with the observation.
I'll ask a question here
Yes.
because that puts a significant burden on staff. Whether you have 1 or 2, when you have to do that constant 5-minute check, and then it increases the risk to the facility because of the increased need. How does the facility, do you see an increase in that type of need right now? Because the number matters, but if you had 5 people that were on 5-minute look checks, that would be significant. So are we
And it
seeing
is,
that increase?
we have actually seen that increase. Probably in the last 2 or 3 years, we've really seen an increase in more mental health issues with our kids. Most of them have more co-occurring. They have substance abuse issues as well as mental health issues. And so one feeds off of the other, and it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. Which came first? Was it the substance abuse that led to the mental health, or the mental health issues are leading to them self-medicating with the substances? I don't know the answer to that question, but it does. It puts a considerable strain on the staff, especially when we're running, oftentimes we're running 2 to 3 staff per 11 or 12 kids. And so they're having to do everything else, but now they're having to add that additional duty of making sure that they're safe all at the same time. So it's definitely difficult. So yeah, go ahead. Oh, wait, no, you gotta wait.
Well, because there's people online.
So are the 2 that are on 5-minute watch, are those in lieu of having them in an observation
Yeah, because
cell because you only have the 2,
because
but
we
you
only
have,
have-
so that's your overflow,
No.
so to speak.
that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So do you then see the need probably for more of those rooms to be added in the future? And do you have, is that a doable thing with what you're?
It would
Current-
be tricky to add the observation cells just because of how we're set up. So one thing they did do when we built the facility is there's 3 pods, and then in the middle, there's a control room that can visibly see those pods. And we've labeled them A, B, and C. And then there's another section right here that doesn't have anything there. It just goes out to outside, and there's a door there. But it was built with the plan to be able to expand it. And so everything's stubbed off to that section. So at some point in time, it won't be in my career because I'm not going to be here that much longer, hopefully a few more years, but within that time, I don't think we're going to need to expand, but it is built for a whole nother pod. So that would kick it up by another 9 beds. So I would easily go from 27 to 36 beds. But it doesn't really, because with the observation cells where that control room is in the middle, those observation cells are directly behind it. And so there's a big window so that they can, the staff can view through it. And then all of the cells in the building, except for those 2 cells, don't have cameras in them. But we do have cameras in the observation cells just so we can keep another mechanism to be able to watch them closely. I mean, I know a lot of people say, well, that's really a privacy violation. And it is, but also our priority at that point in time is not your privacy, it's your safety. And so that trumps the privacy issue. I mean, and I always tell kids when we do tours or whatever, that's one of the big things you lose when you break the laws. You lose a lot of privacy because when you come in that facility, other than those cells, there's cameras everywhere. In the showers, there's not cameras in the showers. But we also have to do, state standard requires us to do 3 checks, wellness checks basically within every 20 minutes. So even if they're in their cell, somebody's still checking on them within every 20 minutes. We do that kind of randomized so a kid can't go, oh, I can count off. They do them every time right at 19 minutes, so we have to kind of randomize it within that. So we usually do more checks than the 3 checks per hour, just mainly because I'm really, that would be my worst day of work ever. If we had a kid complete a suicide in that building, that would not be something I'd want to be involved with at all. So.
And the 20-minute thing, that's everyone who's in there,
That's
or just the
everyone.
ones you've got?
No,
Okay.
that's everyone.
Would you say crime is up in Bonner County?
Well, it is. So I do have some numbers on that. And are you talking more juvenile or adult? Adult is definitely, I mean, if you look at the jail roster, I think they're running between 110 to 120 inmates a day, which is just, it's crazy. And we see the law enforcement pass downs, and I mean, the arrests are big. Meth use is big, fentanyl use is big. And then there's always the domestic abuse. And I mean, anytime you start throwing drugs and alcohol into a situation, then the chances for domestic violence increase considerably. But with juveniles, we did see a pretty good lull during COVID. Historically, we've averaged about 7 kids a day. During COVID, we averaged about 3 kids a day. Right now, we're averaging about 10 kids a day over the last 12 months. So we've started to see that increase. So number of arrests for kids in 2020, we had 135 arrests. In 2021, so that's kind of right. COVID time, we dropped down to 86 arrests for that time. People were home, but they were committing crimes at home, which, yeah, it's a totally different story. And then in 2022, we saw that number rise back up to 95. And I think I forgot to look, I was going to look this morning at what petition number we're at right now. And I think it was in the 80s. So right now we're at about 80 with 3 more months left in the year. So it will probably be close back up to those 2020 numbers for this year would be my guess. In 2021, we had 167 kids admitted into the juvenile detention center. 2021, it dropped down to 129. And then in 2022, it even dropped a little bit more, which is kind of surprising. It was down to 98. But
Are you seeing the same type of youth with a repeat offense? Is that part of what the cycle is, the same?
yeah, we see a lot of the same cycle over and over, same kids, same family. Siblings of the same kids. I mean, it kind of, and I've been doing this long enough now. We see sometimes we'll have parents or even grandparents on adult misdemeanor probation, and then we have their kids, their grandkids. And I've told myself I'm definitely going to retire because I've already had kids that are on probation, and now we have their kids on juvenile probation. And I said, the day that I see a grandchild of one of the kids I had on probation, it's time for me to retire. But yeah, anyway, you had a question.
I want to ask something else if I could. Do you see any other correlations besides it's in their family?
Well,
between
one of the big correlations is substance use, alcohol and drugs. I mean, if you look back in time, one family in particular, that's a pretty notorious family. It's I knew their grandparents, not that they were on probation with me because they're older than I am, but that was the crux of it, substance abuse issues. Then it became their kids, then it down to their kids, and now down to their kids, and it's just generational. And usually what that comes along with drug and alcohol use, there's lots of neglect, there's lots of not just necessarily physical abuse, but emotional abuse. neglect. I mean, it just kind of goes down the line.
You let a chaplain come in and meet with the kids?
We do, yep. So every Sunday we have, Kim comes in. And then, they can come in anytime they want, but they also, and Kim's with the Sheriff's Office Chaplain Corps. And then Mike comes in he was coming in on Mondays. I'm not sure if he's still coming in. And then Ed is a new chaplain who's actually a former detention officer for us. And he's now with the Chaplain Corps. And he comes in and does some chaplain stuff. Plus he also does an exercise group with the kids and keeps them busy.
Couple questions.
Yeah.
Is there a study or has there been a study done in the correlation of parents and or a guardian, grandparents being around? Because there did not seem to be as much of a problem growing up for myself, because there was usually a parent around
Right.
versus now, where in most cases, both parents are working, and in many cases, the kids come home and there's hours that there's no supervision of any type.
Right. So you're asking me, does the presence of research show the presence of a grandparent or another adult being present? Does that
Has had,
lower?
yeah, or does it go up if there's not?
Yeah. So one thing that I was going to talk about a little bit is called the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience Survey. And so the ACEs talks about horrible things that happen to kids. And there's like 9 or 10 things on there. And the higher the score, the higher your chance for to commit crimes or have health issues or a myriad mental health issues. And those are things like being sexually abused, being physically abused, watching your parents having domestic violence, drug use, those kind of things add to those. But there's also, that goes along with that, is what's called resiliency pieces. And one of those pieces of resiliency, and one of probably the biggest one, and this is in my mind, is having an adult in your life that you don't want to disappoint. And so if you have that grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, even a coach, a teacher, anybody in your life that you don't want to disappoint, will take those ACE scores and it will lower it, because it builds that resiliency. And kids are very resilient, but they got to have somebody that they want to not disappoint. So there is, if you look up ACEs, you just Google ACES, and then it will talk about the resiliency stuff. And then there will be a lot more information on having that grandparent or that adult in their life that's important to them.
And the other one is growing up as a child, the push was you've got to go to college to move forward. You got to go to college. It's known that we are, as a country, we are way behind in the need of skilled labor, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, blah, blah, blah. Do any of the kids, are any of them offered the opportunity or directed towards any of that type of program? Or is there any thought of creating anything that way for them?
So one program that we have is the Job Corps, which has been around for, I don't know how many years, but a long time. Like I said, I've been here for 30 years, and it was here when I started. And so that's Job Corps is pretty much, that's all it is vocational training. You go there, you can get, if you haven't graduated or don't have your GED, you can get your GED. And then then they have a whole list of trades that you can learn: masonry, heating and air conditioning, sheet metal work, all kinds of stuff, forestry stuff. I mean, there's just a myriad of different trades, plumbing and electricians. And so that's a federal program through the Department of Interior. The local Department of Labor here has a program. It's the WIOA workforce. I don't know. I got so many acronyms in my head. I can't always remember what all of them mean. But anyway, it's kind of that same type of program, and it will actually help kids get training, vocational type training, and then also help place them into a job once they've done that. But yeah, not every kid is geared towards going to college, and yeah. Plus, college has gotten so expensive that unless you really know what you want to do going to college, you're going to waste a lot of money until you figure it out. Yeah.
John, and then it'll go John, Doug, and then Teresa. John?
Hello. We recently had a recall over in Priest River for trustees, and the recall happened. I got involved against the recall, and I was drawn to this area because it was beautiful and there were friendly people everywhere, until I decided to help out somebody who had a child that dropped out of school because they were being bullied. And as I was door knocking and getting to know the people of the community, I noticed that there were many wonderful people, many people who didn't know what was going on, and others who were very close-minded and antagonistic, if I can say. And one of the things that people said, whether they were for or against the recall, was, well, my child or my grandchild was bullied in school a lot. And this school district has the lowest academic scores in North Idaho that I know of, and maybe all of Idaho. And honestly, as a taxpayer citizen, I was very disappointed by the attitudes that I was encountering there. And then going to some of these school board meetings and other meetings, there were mobs. These were bullies. And no wonder the children are bullies in school, because the adults are modeling that behavior. So my question to you, sir, is, since you serve the entire county, is that community reflective of the entire county? Because in my view, the citizens of the county voted in that school board because they wanted change. And then the locals, because they wanted it local only, resisted that. And there was no openness to preparing the children for life beyond Priest River, which is really sad. So is Priest River School District reflective of the entire county from your experience for the people that wind up in your facility? And thank you for being here.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. I think, I mean, when we're dealing with the kids, primarily kids are kids. I don't think they've changed a lot. The environment that they have to grow up in now has changed a lot, but I don't think kids have changed a lot. But as far as I mean, that kind of gets into the political climate of a lot of things, and yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
I think maybe we could kind of change the question to be more of, are we seeing this kids from certain areas within Bonner County where maybe we could look as a community of deploying resources? So like if we're seeing a significant number of kids from Sandpoint High School versus West Bonner County or something like that. You guys gather that type of data so that as a community, it might be a place where the call to action is, we need more involvement from adults to get that positive resilience that we need in kids to want to do better. Because that might be kind of a call to action for a community to say, we're failing not just at school, but just in development in certain areas.
Right.
Is that kind of more what you're thinking of? Is it a specific area that we're seeing people from?
Yeah, and I don't know if we see it much different over there than it is here as far as the kids go. I think we could always have more resources in all our areas. But what the biggest struggle we're running into right now is not so much that we don't have funding to help support resources. It's finding people that are willing to do it. There's just a shortage in therapists, counselors. I've had 4 positions open in the detention center, and I've not even received a new application for in over 2 months for any of the positions. It's just finding folks that want to get out and work. And I know Priest River, being a smaller community, those resources are even less and less than they are in Sandpoint, or Bonner's Ferry, I think, is kind of in that same boat. Where then if you move more south down to Kootenai County, then bigger population base, there's a lot more resources there. But so I think we struggle everywhere. But I know that Conixu, they have behavioral health unit that is here, based here in Sandpoint, and extends also to Bonners Ferry and to Priest River, which they have counselors that are there that the kids can work with. But
We got to go to Doug here. So we'll go Doug, Teresa, then you do. Doug.
Hello.
hey, Doug.
So I got a couple questions. You mentioned expansion, future expansion of the youth facility there. Which direction is that set up to go?
So it would be, so the area that was designed to do that with is on the northeast side of the building. This doesn't tell you much, huh?
No, that tells me quite a bit, actually, in terms of, relative to the fairground.
Right,
would
so
be
it'd be that
parking.
corner closest to the fairgrounds.
What a surprise. So another question I got is, your chaplain program, and folks working there generally, I guess, background checks are required.
Absolutely. Almost everybody that comes into our facility has to have a background check. The only real exception to that would be an attorney, which they probably all need a background check anyway, but we can't deprive a youth of visiting with their attorney. So we don't do background checks on the attorneys. And I would think if they needed one, the bar would be involved with all of that. But yeah, actually, Dan York is the head of the chaplain corps through the sheriff's office. And so he takes care of all the background checks for any of his folks. But if we have counselors or anybody coming in to do different groups or any of those kind of things, then we do background checks on everybody. Anybody that's going to have contact with the kids.
Thank you. Also, you know my standard question about how many,
Yeah.
genders you have to recognize. But what that brings up also is, you have lots and lots of federal regulations that you need to comply with. Could you give a kind of brief outline of those?
There's several that we deal with within the detention center. The primary ones are is PREA, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, that we have to be in compliance with, and we're actually audited by the Department of Justice every 3 years to make sure we're in compliance with that. And there's about 150 standards that we have to have policy and procedure for to make sure that we're in compliance with that. We just had our last audit a little over a year ago, so we got a couple more years before we have to have another audit, which is another one of those great things the federal government's done to us in terms of mandating something that we actually have to hire our own independent auditor to come and do, and then we have to, of course, pay for it, and an auditor can basically set their own price. So I think the last audit we had was in the neighborhood of $6,000 or $7,000 to have them come in and do that. And then the other primary federal mandate that we have to follow is the Juvenile Justice Delinquency and Prevention Act of 1974. So it's a little outdated and they need to update it. But those are the standards, such as not incarcerating youth with adults, making sure we're not locking up status offenders, and status offenders are those cases like habitual truancy, runaway, curfew, those kind of things. They've made it illegal to basically incarcerate that population. Also sight and sound. We can't, not only can we not incarcerate youth with adults, they can't even see or hear them. So we're pretty lucky with our facility because we're several hundred feet away from the adult jail. So we really don't run into any of those issues. So those are the two primary federal mandates or federal laws that we have to follow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Teresa.
Good morning. Thank you for coming out this morning.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I believe you partially answered my question. My question was, first of all, it's very sad that kids have to go through this.
Absolutely.
I was curious about your counselor positions. I'm sure you have to have some sort of psychology degree to qualify for a counselor. Do you know off the top of your head?
So for the detention officers, we just require a high school diploma for the detention officers. We do have one mental health clinician, and he's actually an LCPC, so he's a licensed clinical practical, whatever, another acronym. But anyway, he's actually a master's level therapist clinician. But so he's the only one that we have that has that level of education. But we do have several others of just the regular detention officers. We have a couple that have degrees in psychology. We have some that have degrees in criminal justice. And then on the juvenile probation side, we do require them to at least have a bachelor's degree, usually in something along the lines of like our newest hire. She has a bachelor's in psychology, and then several others have degrees in criminal justice. But
Okay,
we're
now
hiring, so if anybody's looking for a job, we need some detention officers in a bad way.
yeah, I know. And as the area grows, it's only going to get worse. And
Yeah,
that's-
I think you're probably right.
Kids find a way to get in trouble, especially when there's not a lot to do. The other thing, do you know of any mentoring programs for, people, adults that have gone down a rough road in life and have, turned out to be successful citizens? I think that's really important for kids. They can resonate with people that have had troubled youth and have, grown up and gotten through life and become good people.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to look at. I know there was a young gal that worked actually at the museum that was looking to put together a mentoring program, and I touched base with her. Oh, it was last winter that we met. And so I know she was working on that. So I need to actually touch base with her again and see if we're looking at actually getting that up and running or where we're at with it. But yeah, mentoring, again, like I talked earlier about having that adult in your life that you don't want to disappoint. That's really where a good mentoring program could really step in and provide that adult that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be interested in following up to see if they could get some sort of mentoring program for these kids. So
Yeah.
thanks for all you do. You
Oh.
enjoy the rest of your day and have a good week.
Thank you.
Mr. Willie.
Thank you.
Two things. Number one, with regard to the juveniles in custody, are all of your juveniles pre-trial or pre-court or post-conviction?
Both, all of the above.
Both. So you
yeah.
have long-term facility now. If they're
So no, we're more of a short-term facility. So
Okay.
generally, we won't have anybody there that's longer than probably 3 or 4 months would be about the longest.
okay, I'm just unfamiliar with the way Idaho works on this.
Right.
Normally, to my knowledge, post, it's not, they don't call it conviction. They usually
Post
say that they-
adjudication.
post adjudication. If they've been adjudicated to have committed a felony crime, even the standard felony misdemeanor doesn't really apply in a juvenile case.
Not so much. It does. There's a little bit different penalties, but it's still pretty
Okay,
much.
so those who are adjudicated of having committed an egregious violent crime, where would they be housed?
So there's another mechanism within the juvenile system in Idaho. There's another state agency called the Department of Juvenile Corrections. So if we have a kid that's committed a serious offense, like a violent offense or a sex offense, and they're not appropriate to return back to the community, then the court can order their custody into the Department of Juvenile Corrections. And then they have 3 facilities throughout the state that those kids would then go to those facilities, and they're more long-term, anywhere from up to their 21st birthday. So, but yeah, our focus is we're usually more, I mean, sometimes we got 2 new kids in over the weekend. They may be out today. I mean, that could be that quick, and they're pre-adjudicated. They haven't even had an initial appearance yet. And then, but yeah, those kids that need that longer stay would go to those facilities. There's one in St. Anthony, which has been down there since the early 1900s. And it's still the same on the same spot. There's some new buildings, but it's the same area. And then there's one in Lewiston, which a lot of our kids, as long as they're not sex offenders, will go to the Lewiston facility just because it's closer regionally, so parents can still get down and visit more easily than they can then go into either St. Anthony, and then the third facility is in Nampa. So all down in southwest or southeast Idaho.
That kind of opened the door to another question, but
Sure.
I wanted to add anecdotally. In another lifetime. In another place many years ago. I walked a footbeat on Hollywood Boulevard for 5 years. And I saw runaways from all over the country.
Yeah.
The only state I did not see that I cannot recollect, runaways coming from is Idaho. And that's over a 5-year period from 1977 to 1982.
Wow.
I just cannot recall any kid from Idaho. And I remember them coming from every other state in the union. The other question that you brought up, what is the occurrence level of sexually violent crime among juveniles in this area?
Do you mean, were there more like forcible type stuff or just sex offenses in general?
Well, let's go in general, and then you
Yeah,
can break it down.
I think with COVID, we're seeing a lot of fallout from that, people being home. I hesitate to get too deep in that because I'm not sure who all's listening, but younger siblings were home, parents not necessarily supervising. There was somebody available, or their friends, their younger siblings' friend came over or whatever. We're seeing actually quite a few sex offense cases. Lilybrook family, the CAC here, the Children Advocacy Center, which is part of the prosecutor's office, that they deal with all of the sex offense cases that come through and interview all the victims, doing forensic interviews. And I sit on that MDT or multidisciplinary team, and just sexual abuse cases, either adult or youth, there's just off the charts. There's like 14 pages now of cases that they're actively in the court system being prosecuted. It's rampant. And it's always been somewhat prevalent, but I think with COVID, I think it ramped it up just because kids weren't able to get out and necessarily be around kids their own age and do things with kids that were more age appropriate to do things with. So they took it out on younger siblings or relatives or whoever was available at the time.
I had a friend ask me if I would ask you, following up on the Job Corps thing, has Bonner County referred any kids? And if so, what has been the success rate?
So we've actually referred a lot of kids to Job Corps over the years. Like I said, it was around even when I very first started 30 years ago. Actually success rate's pretty good. I'm thinking of one kid, James, right now. He just went over and completed. And we had Billy, who actually did the commercial painting program, and actually, if he hadn't gotten more trouble, we had a job in Spokane as a commercial painter. So actually the success rate's been pretty high. Kind of along that line too, another program I forgot to bring up is the Idaho Youth Challenge Academy. And we send several kids there every time that it's available. It's opened up about every 6 months. It's down in Pierce, Idaho, which is kind of south of Lewiston somewhere. I'm not 100% for sure where it's at, but it's more of a boot camp style school. You have to be 16 to be able to go, and it's more focused on education. Is for those kids that really just have not done well in school for whatever reason. It's not so much vocational, but it's more academic as far as just getting their high school diploma. But we've seen a lot of success with that program. In fact, we usually send about 4 or 5 kids per class down to the Youth Challenge Academy. So I don't know, did I answer your question fully on the Job Corps? I mean, it's a pretty successful program. And it's not for everybody. I mean, we couldn't send a violent offender there. But it's a solid program.
Just want to ask one more, sorry.
Sure.
Okay, so since you said that you see it in families like grandparents, kids. I mean, and I'm not saying I'm for this, but why hasn't the state intervened if there was, you know, alcohol abuse or if the kids are being abused or?
But, and they have, I mean, you can intervene, but it doesn't mean folks are gonna change their behaviors. I mean, like I said, we see, like Asia had brought up earlier, we see that rotating door with lots of the same kids. It's not that we haven't put in lots of interventions and lots of programs. You can give, I mean, it's kind of like leading a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I mean, you can provide somebody with all these services, but until that person decides they want to make some changes and actually utilize those, you're just spinning your wheels. I mean, it's probably one of my biggest frustrations is people just don't want to take advantage of the services that are offered, and they just want to continue to go down that same path without improving themselves. And maybe there's a lot more to it than that. And trauma is the big thing now. Everybody's got trauma. Well, everybody's got trauma, but that doesn't make it all right to traumatize other people or victimize other people because you have trauma.
I'll also be a dissenting type of an opinion. It's also important that just because somebody comes from a family where there are drugs and alcohol, that you don't assign that you are destined to be like that. Because
Absolutely not.
I will tell you, I am that person who dealt with mental health issues and family and drug abuse, and not one of my siblings turned out that way. And I think it is a good question to ask as you look at the people that are coming through your center over and over again. And there's clearly a deficit in family. What can we as a community do to help impact that positively? I know one of the things we saw was that there's just a lack of family involved in students in general. But that doesn't mean there's not a replacement for that person that's not able to, you know, play the role of mom or dad. Sometimes it's a community member that you can look up to. Is there something that we can do as a community to help positively impact what's happening with youth? Because the rhetoric from, you know, the media is very negative, very victim, very not conducive to turning lives around. It's almost like it's the excuse for the continued behavior instead of you can be the force of change. So that's a loaded question.
There's a lot of
Sure,
questions
but
in there, but
well,
I
that's a
think-
lot of the people that are here.
Yeah.
Most of them don't have.
Well, I think
they're all
Teresa's
over,
question, I mean, is there a mentoring program? And I think I think that really comes more from the community trying to put something like that together than say an agency like myself.
Yeah.
Or I think maybe some church groups or youth groups, something along those lines. If the community could start bringing that together and getting kids involved and make it fun and exciting, would draw kids in and have breakfast or snacks or whatever. But I think
It's all for Diane. She lures people here and tells them.
could work. I'll come every week if you're gonna have breakfast. But I think the community could do, and I think a mentoring program again would be very, very beneficial. And you're right, I didn't mean to make it sound like every kid
Oh,
that's
no, I
in
just
trouble.
listened for that one
Because there are lots of kids, lots and lots of kids
Yeah.
that come from that type of background that are still very successful and do well in life.
I think, I know I grew up with that idea. You often hear that you'll become, instead of saying, I lived with the example of what not to do.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
sometimes that's a different message in a different way that if you teach people to be victims, that is what they will become. And that's the
Yep.
product of our education. If we teach you can do better and you're accountable, it's just a different hurdle, and you'll be
Right.
surprised at what you can achieve. So
Yep.
I think the idea of doing mentoring is something that as a community, we can look at of what can we do to help that situation. Because we have an influx of drugs coming into youth right now that is
Huge.
uncontrollable.
Yep. Yep.
So. Anybody else?
I was just gonna ask you if the work training programs that you have, those kids get sent during their time with you, or is it once they're
They
released?
can.
Or
If they can, it depends, but yeah, they can, so Job Corps, they can go while they're on probation. And then the workforce training program through the Department of Labor, they can all be on probation during that time.
but not while they're housed with you?
Not while they're housed,
That's
no,
what-
but we
that's what
can get, the probation officers, a lot of times are getting those things put in place while they're housed. But then once they're released, those things are already put in place, so they're transitioning transitioning immediately into those. If they have that little bit of lag time sometimes, and then they get back in trouble before they even get started. So a lot of times they'll transition right out of detention to particularly to go like to Job Corps, because those sites are over in Washington. There's some in southern Idaho. There's not one real close to us, so it takes a little bit of planning.
And then just, what's a typical day look like for a kid in your facility?
In our facility, so like today, for example, so wake up is about 6:30 in the morning. They get up, start taking showers, cleaning their room. Breakfast is served at 7. All of our food comes over from the adult jail. So they have breakfast at 7. They finish that up. They'll finish up their cleaning and finish up whoever hasn't got their shower yet. School starts at 8 o'clock. We have a certified teacher from Lake Ponderay School District that comes in. In fact, I passed her on her way to there as I was coming here. So they will go to school from 8 to noon. They have a couple breaks in between that. They'll break at noon for lunch. They'll be down until 1 o'clock. Then they go back to school from 1 to 2. And then the school day is done, and school runs on the same schedule as every other school does, at least in because she's a LPOSD employee. So, but I think both districts run pretty much on the same. But even though she's an LPOSD student, I know a lot of you guys are from the west side. All of those kids still go to school. It doesn't matter what school they're in. If they're in our facility, they go to school. And then when school's done, depending on the day, on Tuesdays, normally it's pretty quiet on Tuesdays after that, because Tuesday's our primary court day. So staff is usually tied up with transporting kids over to court, picking up kids that are taken into custody at court. But different days, there's different things going on. On Mondays and Wednesdays in the afternoon after school, we have a guy that comes in and does large muscle group exercise with them. So he does some yoga stuff. He does some stretching stuff, running in place, has some light weight stuff that they can do. And then let's see, and then our clinician on Thursdays does a group. Thursdays and Fridays he does group. Saturday we have Dr. Mathis comes in. He's a clinical psychologist, but he's also a rock musician, and so he comes in and does a group on he's mostly an addictionologist, but he connects that back to music, and the kids really kind of connect to it because he's kind of got the long hair. If you looked at him, you wouldn't necessarily think he was a clinical psychologist, but the guy's off the charts smart, and the kids really enjoy his group. So that's on Saturdays. He comes and does that. Saturday's a little different. That's the deep cleaning day. Kids do all of the cleaning with staff helping them. In the detention center, they don't come out and clean, but they clean within the facility.
All right.
But one of the other programs I forgot to tell you about that we do have, we call a program called WILD. WILD, another acronym, work in lieu of detention. So it's kind of like inmate labor that they do over at the sheriff's department, but we have an employee, that's what he does, is he runs work crews. We send them out and they do projects in the community. They do a lot of work at the animal shelter. And it's kind of a mentoring, that's part of that job too, is mentoring. And also teaching how to some work ethic and how to, if you're going to do a job, take some pride in the job and do it right. So that's a big part of what he does.
I think our last question will go to Dan.
Yeah, last question then. I'm assuming that the philosophy of the juvenile court system is that the family and home is a better place for the children than the hall.
Most of the time. Not all of the time, but most of the
basic philosophy.
Yeah, we want kids to be at home. We don't want to incarcerate kids unless they need to be incarcerated.
Okay. All right. Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
That was a lot of
thanks for having me.
information and maybe even an opportunity for us to figure out how to help our community. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And if anybody has questions they think of later, don't hesitate to give me a call. We're in the phone book.
Or apply for a job.
Or apply for a job. Yeah, if you have family members or if you yourself would like to come and work. Or if any time you guys would like a tour just to see what